images. The current problem in this domain is when we train students, I would say novice surgeons, to become acquainted with these systems, of which there are not many. And simulators are different. They have different operating principles. And the problem is we need to find benchmark criteria.
Doctor, we are very sorry to interrupt you. Sorry for the interruption. Can you speak a bit louder or place the microphone near to you so that...
Okay, is this a little bit better?
Yes, this is perfect. You can start.
Okay, thank you. So the problem is one of finding benchmark criteria that allow us to say whether a trainee surgeon is actually evolving, whether the performance is evolving properly. And we need precise, specific, and quantitative criteria that allow us to say that the trainee has reached a certain level of proficiency, and then we can take it further. The problem currently is that what the trainees are training for is tying knots as quickly as possible, and this is maybe not enough. So here I am talking about a new procedure that we are currently developing at the iCube laboratory in Strasbourg. It involves wearable wireless biosensors, and it permits real-time monitoring of interventional data with regard to actually what the hands of the knee surgeon in the simulator are doing. To record these data, we use wearable force-sensitive resistors, FSRs, and the measurements allow us to gather spatio-temporal grip force profiles for different locations in the surgeon's hands. So this is based on current neuroscience. We know that there are functional properties of mechanoreceptors in a sort of from hand to brain and back loop, from the brain to the hand. And these functional properties can actually be exploited in that current technology to develop grip force benchmarking that allows to track surgical skill or evolution in simulated training. So we rely on what is called prehensile synergies. They are reflected by characteristics of digit action, and there are co-variation patterns during task execution. And this is the working hypothesis with respect to this work. We believe that this reveals characteristics of surgical task expertise and task evolution. Now, the materials and methods are quite complicated. We have a data acquisition system that collects data via Arduino and Bluetooth from the force-sensitive resistors on the hand technology to the PC, to the computer. We have several contact points of these force-sensitive resistors with the hand, as shown in the diagram here in this slide on the wireless glove prototype. A picture of the wireless glove prototype is shown below here. There is a trainee surgeon in action on the robot-assisted surgery system for simulation in a simulated task. And the system is operated bimanually. Both hands are in action. The task used to measure the grip profiles from these different locations on the fingers of the surgeon's hands. The task is a simple several-step, 5 or 6-step pick-and-place task in the simulator environment. And the task is either executed by the dominant or the non-dominant hand. And there are differences, of course, in task execution as a function of the hand that is being involved in performing the critical operations necessary to perform the task with 100% precision. Now, the data acquisition is ensured by high-level technology. We make sure in the first instance that we have similar calibration curves for all sensors, and the forces are measured at the millivolt scale. So they are very weak because the device is not one that you grip with full power, but you have to be rather subtle in manipulating the two handles of the device that you have seen in the previous slide. and the forces are recorded in millivolts. But we have reliable and quite similar calibration curves for all the sensors involved in the measurements. Regulated 3.3 voltages are provided to the sensors through the Arduino, and the Arduino is powered by a battery enabling wireless connection. The battery voltage is directly controlled by the Arduino, and the levels are displayed continuously on the screen so we can see what's happening. The wireless connected to the computer for data storage and data acquisition is enabled by Bluetooth, and it's running with 115.200 bits per second. There are algorithms for running the gloves on the one hand and algorithms for the data collection on the other, and each of the two gloves sends data to the computer separately. As I said before, only one hand executes the major operations for the task, the other hand is used to control the parallel device of the robotic system. The software then reads the input from the gloves and stores the data on the computer, and the data are sent to the computer with headers so that the data, the origin of the data, can be tracked. So they have a sensor ID and a timestamp, so we know which sensor the data exactly comes from and at what time exactly a data point has been recorded. The Arduino acquires voltages from each sensor every 20 milliseconds, 50 Hertz rate, and the data package is sent to the computer through the Bluetooth. So this allows that data from each individual operator and each individual sensor location on the hand can be saved in an Excel file with the IDs and the stamps for each sensor. And the data can then be analyzed directly or fed directly into any processing software for statistical analysis. So, sorry. Here we are. So this is another picture of the robotic device, and you see in a little bit, with a little bit more detail, you see the device here, what the effect is, what the tool ends are actually doing for rotation, translation, deflection. This is the endoscope. We're talking about minimally invasive endoscopic surgery here. Sorry, I should have mentioned that maybe from the outset. The endoscopic camera is here, and the handles are attached to this sort of device for rotation, translation, and deflection. Here you see the wearable sensor device in action on the right hand, dominant hand of this trainee. Now, how do results look for an individual? So we have different positions in the fingers of the hand. They correspond to different anatomical locations with different connectivity to the brain that steers and commands the motor output of the different fingers. And sensor 5 is on the middle phalanx of the middle finger. You see here the data recorded from the expert left dominant hand deploy minimal force on the middle phalanx of the middle finger, whereas the dominant right hand of the novice deploys much stronger forces. What is particularly important in this sort of precise surgical precision task is fine grip force control by the middle phalanx of the small finger. The small finger is involved in subtle grip force control and allows to steer optimally precision movements by deploying forces minimalistically, but in a very controlled way. So what is interesting that you need to deploy a minimum of force with the middle finger to be effective, but a novice does not at all know how to use the small finger for fine force control. This is why we have a rather weak performance here on the middle phalanx of the pinky in a novice's dominant, because he has not yet learned how to optimally deploy forces with the small finger, with the pinky, to steer the robot device optimally. Now, the expert's data are interesting from several points of view, because you have a clear difference between the left, which is dominant hand in this case, and the non-dominant hand. So what characterizes the novice's performance is that there are no systematic patterns and no systematic differences between the right and the left hand. So he has not learned to use his dominant hand effectively for performing this kind of task. Now, in these measurements are sampled in task time. We have several thousands of measurements per sensor. Only a few are shown here because it would take a long time to go into the details of every measurement from every finger. But that emerges from the data is that specific fingers are used by the expert in a consistent way, and there's a difference between the dominant and the non-dominant hand. This is shown here on the example of small forces deployed by the small finger, which are essential in this task for fine grip force control. I said that earlier. Whereas the middle finger, which deploys gross grip force control, need not be used in this type of task. We don't need any gross grip force from the middle finger to steer the handles of the robotic device. And we see that the expert actually at the beginning he deploys a little bit of force and then it goes down, becomes stable, whereas the novice deploys a lot of gross grip force from the middle finger. Now, these examples are to show you that on the basis of these data, which are the beginning of this project, so the first data we have recorded with this wearable device, allow us to describe profiles, sensor activity profiles in space across the different regions of the fingers of the hand and in time across several moments in successive task sessions where the novice or expert for comparison performs the same type of movement. Then we can compare the data for each and every sensor location and see how the expert data look with respect to that of a novice or a trainee who has had just a few sessions. And on the basis of these comparisons, we are then able to make further statistical conclusions and to run further trials that allow to take this grip force profiling a little bit further. Now, another way of looking at the same problem is which sensors behave in the same way, which kind of sensor activities are correlated during task execution and which are not. Now, in grip force physiology and psychophysiology, we know that the better somebody gets at a precision task, the more parsimoniously he will deploy forces from all fingers. So once somebody becomes really proficient at the manual task, he will deploy less and less finger forces, and there is a phenomenon of decorrelation. The forces become more and more independent with time, and you will find at the end that only 2 or maybe 3 fingers are working in synergy, which means that the forces recorded from the locations on these fingers are correlated, whereas in a novice at the beginning, almost everything is correlated. And this is shown here. We have here correlations between the activities of different sensor locations. So we have S5, S3, S8, S3, they're all labeled here. And these are the Pearson's product moment correlations for the novice with his dominant hand. In the expert, all these sensors function in a more or less independent way, which means the sensor profiles, the grip force profiles are not correlated, with the exception of sensor S10 and sensor S5 and sensor S10 and S6. These are the preferential correlations in the expert user's dominant hand, and they're functionally significant because he uses these 2 fingers in synergy to accomplish the task with the maximum precision and with the shortest time. Now, to give you an idea of what we're talking about here, the underlying physiology and psychophysiology of this is the somatosensory map in the human brain. So the idea is, and that is current neuroscience, is that in the brain, the information about pain or mechanical affection or also much sensory information is represented somatotopically in the brain, which means that these locations here on the hand correspond to specific neural network ensembles in the brain. So once a small network gets correlated significantly, like here the expert surgeons correlated locations in the hand, these are the senses that are positively correlated and work in synergy during the task. Here the blue indicates negative correlation, the gray indicates senses that are not active during the task, and the yellow indicates senses that work independently. So in the expert, whether it's dominant or non-dominant, and we have a minimal amount of network synergistics because only a few locations are correlated, and the rest has acquired some functional independence, and there is what is called functional redundancy, whereas in the beginner, everything is either positively or negatively correlated, and there is no functional redundancy, which means this guy here has not learned how to use his dominant hand optimally yet to achieve optimal precision. Now, these are the results from a trainee who has had a few trials with his dominant hand only and no training at all. So interestingly, from the non-dominant hand, there is no connectivity whatsoever, but he had never had any training with a non-dominant hand. So, which is interesting here because it says something about dominance. The non-dominant hand, when it is not used, it doesn't establish any connectivity at all between the different locations. The dominant hand, when it is used, it establishes functional connectivity in the hand and probably also in the brain. And this connectivity is over, let's say it's over connected at the beginning because it hasn't worked, some network hasn't worked out some network economy yet, and it becomes functionally organized in the expert's dominant and also non-dominant hand, because he's a left-hander and he uses both hands. This is something I forgot to say. It's important to say that people who can use both hands as dominant or non-dominant hand, they will have very similar profiles with the two hands. So, of course, this is all beginning work, and we have to understand further what happens in the dominant, in the non-dominant hand of several individuals, because here we have three. And it is important to give some statistical body to these data now and see how different trainees, how different are the connectivity patterns in different trainees with different backgrounds, and what are the differences between non-dominant and dominant hands. Because some people might be, although they have a preference to use either the left or the right hand, be able to do things just as well with the other hand. So this is something we don't know yet. We don't understand yet what happens when you have, let's say, data from 10 or 20 people, but this is in the process of being constructed now. The project is about beginning to take off, if I may say so. The funding has come through. So just to tell you what it means here when we're talking about the novice, the trained user, and the expert, what does it mean in terms of task performance? Well, here we have the task time for the different robotic task sessions from which the measures you have seen were taken, and you have the number of incidents that occurred during task execution. Incidents are when the object in the simulator is dropped by the tool, when the tool trajectory needs to be adjusted to the target position, and the trainee has to start again. So what we see quite clearly that the expert has the shortest task time. This would be expected, but it's not enough. He also has the fewest number of incidents. With the dominant hand, we recorded 3 minor incidents of having to readjust the task trajectory with the tool, That was all. Never dropped the object, never did anything critically wrong. And we had 0 with the non-dominant hand, which is interesting because this left-hander is clearly able to do things very well with the dominant and the non-dominant hand. In the complete novice, we have, as expected, the longest task time during these measurements, and the highest number of incidents, a little bit more with the non-dominant hand. And the trained user who had a little bit of experience, he's a little bit in between these two. But he's not the same precision level, nor the same speed level compared with him. Now, what can we say about these very preliminary data? We can say that we believe that grip force profiling exploits functional dynamics or prehensile synergies, if you wish, that reflect directly the brain processing during training. We use wireless variable sensor technology that makes such profiling easy. We believe that grip force profiles will allow us to make some assessment, some objective assessment about surgical task skill evolution in the simulated task. This is the working assumption, if you wish. So the grip forces reflect expertise if we know how to interpret them properly. And real-time tracking of grip forces can be used in combination with other technology. We can, for example, provide sensory feedback, and that can allow to control performance quality during training. Sometimes in laparoscopic or robotic surgical interventions, it can be dangerous when you deploy too much force all of a sudden. And if the sensor captures these variations and give a signal right away saying, hey, you have to go easy, you're deploying too much force, this could help to prevent excessive grip forces or excessive grip force deployment during interventions and prevent tissue damage. So this is another possibility with this technology. So we can monitor training, we can try to work out benchmark procedures and benchmark criteria, and we can also deploy this wearable device on trained expert surgeons to give them, to monitor the tasks still during interventions and give them feedback should they be tired and was for some reason all of a sudden deploy more force than is necessary, and that could be eventually dangerous, to give them